Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So Matt, talk a little bit about being a first-time CRO. What are some of the top lessons you think you learned, or do you have a different viewpoint of what that CRO job really is all about?
Yeah, I think it was sort of a role that I had always strived to get to in my career. I got to it an interesting way too, because I moved from, if you look at my background, the majority of my career in VC-backed companies, first-time CRO in a PE-backed company. So there were sort of two things to learn. One, the role, and two, the difference between VC and PE. They sort of run the organization somewhat differently. I think for me, as I kind of reflected back, I'm about to hit the 3-year mark now, about what I thought it was going to be and what it became. At first I probably focused more on sort of, getting the 3 R's into my leaders' heads, getting the right cadences down, like a lot of the sort of operational stuff, which is all critically important, but candidly was kind of the easy part, right? The harder part that I maybe wasn't as prepared for, that I kind of had to learn, maybe a little bit of trial by fire, or a couple things. One, realizing that every word you say, people internalize very deeply, right? And I think back to when I worked for you, John, there's still things to this day that I remember that you said 15 years ago, right, that sort of still stick with me. You get into this role, and that's a lot of responsibility that you maybe don't realize at first, until you start to hear people repeating and realizing like everything you say and do is being watched, and internalized. And then that sort of dovetails into culture, right? So a lot of times as the CRO, you're really not just the tone setter for the sales organization, but oftentimes for the entire company, right? They tend to rally around like, what is the tone that the CRO is setting from a culture perspective, right? We have like the first slide in my one of my leaders' decks is culture is what you tolerate, right? And that's a lot of us taking a lot of our leadership principles and determining like, what do we actually tolerate from our ICs, from each other, from the rest of the org? How do we communicate with the rest of the org? And ultimately here it's been, how do we build not just a winning culture, but a team-based culture, right? So I've been very fortunate and unfortunate. I've been on some highly talented teams that weren't very team-based and didn't do very well. And I've been on some highly talented teams that have really been in it together, like we have at Redwood. And that's driven, I think being able to keep that culture has driven kind of an outsized outcome for us recently. And then I think the interesting complication for me personally when I came into the role was it was during COVID, right? Mm-hmm. So building a company and a culture during COVID over Zoom, right? I'm a very traditional, grew up as a full stack rep, in person, all that kind of stuff. And trying to figure out with my leadership team, how do we get a culture built globally when we're not together in person very often, right? And when I say culture, I'm not talking about because we don't have, happy hours and ping pong tables and that kind of nonsense. But really, how do you get people to commit to each other and commit to that team and commit to holding each other accountable? How do you do that virtually, and how do you build relationships? And it's complicated, I think, in this era for a lot of us, because a lot of the sellers now, there's a bifurcation where many of them grew up on Zoom, right? So some of the more senior sellers grew up in the building, and some of my younger sellers had never met a customer before in person, right? Mm-hmm. Which we have a corny phrase now, shape of the building. I want to know the shape of the building that you're selling to. If you don't know that, you're not selling to them yet, right? Like you got to go get on site and be in person. So all these things I think have been really interesting about like how to build a culture and how important that is as a CRO. And then probably the last thing that I was completely unprepared for was managing a board, right? So your role in sort of managing up and managing a board is something that, I would encourage anybody who wants to step into a role like this to make sure that you've got a couple of mentors around you who can help you understand what what you can and can't do with the board, what your role is with the board. And I was very lucky here. My first board was from our last investors. They were incredible. They were great people. But something that not a lot of people talk about when they talk about getting into this seat is board management with your CEO. So,
Well, that's a lot of stuff. So can we
a lot.
unpack?
I'm sorry.
No, it's really good. Can we unpack some of that? So what was the biggest thing? What did you think the job was? And then you said what it became. So you talked a little bit about people listen, culture, team versus me. But what
Yeah.
was there one or two big shockers like, oh shit, like,
Yeah, I think as we've grown, so when I got here, we were about 80 million in revenue. We're a little over 200 now, the past couple of years. I think you start to realize that you're in deals a lot less. You're not just the more senior sales leader that's brought into deals. Really, you've got to be a systems person, right? And that systems thinking starts to really take up a lot of your days. Like my days are jam-packed from early in the morning to late at night. And a lot of it is going through, everything from how are we going to model out how many BDRs you need or how many SDRs you need or reps or coverage. We have a fairly complicated company here, and the fact that we have a PLG assisted, and an SLG motion all sitting within in the same company,
mhm.
right? That creates a lot of complications about how to run the business. So I think for me, realizing that you've really got to hire really good leaders underneath you who can manage the customer relationships and the relationships with prospects. And you get to do a lot less of that in this seat, and you have to do a lot more kind of table setting. I've sort of been shocked that, I said this at GKO. A lot of what I do is look at in the QBRs, the what's working and what's not working. And my job is to go turn all the what's not working into what's working. Right.
Right.
The simplest thing in the world, it sounds like, but that's really, I'm one of the only people who could do that for the sales force. So, for example, our legal was a mess when I got here, and it was all red, if you will, all the feedback. Now it's all green, right? We have an incredible legal function here. But that was something I had to go take on. Literally went out and found the general counsel myself, brought them in-house with her, rebuilt that legal function. So things like that aren't necessarily what I expected being in sort of the first chair was going to be about, but it's sort of clear that like your job is to sort of take some of these big rocks that nobody else can move and tackle them for the whole organization.
And what about the board? What did you find out about, interfacing with the board?
Um, so here I came into a board that I didn't know and a CEO that I didn't know, right?
Mhm.
Which is, and I really came for the opportunity and put a little bit of trust in the fact that during the interview process, I really liked some of the folks I interfaced with from the board, and I like the CEO, obviously. But honestly, you're going to spend that first 6 to 9 months proving yourself, right? You've got to come in with an opinion about, here's what I believe, and here's my view of the world. And mine was actually very different from the board. My board had traditionally run more PLG motions, a lot of inbound. They'd never had success with outbound before. They hadn't done high-end enterprise before. So I had a really unique first experience where I think we had to learn together, how do I take some of their superpowers and sort of take them out of them? And then how do I earn enough trust to start to do some of the things that I knew we needed to do to scale the company to where we are today and beyond, which is to start to build up, a strategic accounts program and really do outbound and get intimate with the install base and not just be volume and velocity. And we do both here in different parts of the business.
Matt, I really like this point that you're on. And when you went into private equity, I'm assuming there was some kind of culture, there was some type of existing motions and first-time CRO. Could you just go one level deeper on how to balance learning? I have a saying that says, be the same before you're different, meaning you got to go in and you got to understand what they're doing, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well before. And at the same time, you have to put what you know into place. How do you balance that in order to gain the trust, the favor of the organization when there's got to be changes? How do you balance, especially in culture, understanding the culture and then supplementing or adapting it or changing the culture?
Yeah, I think the way that I've done it personally, really my whole career, and this was I think a bit of a learning, because when you first get into leadership, you sometimes mimic the leaders around you or that you've
Yeah.
worked. And I think as you get a little older, which I unfortunately am, there didn't used to be gray in this beard, you realize that the only way to do it is really to be yourself, right? So for me personally, it was about being extremely open. I probably take some risks with how open I am with my organization, but that's the way that I build a level of trust that then allows me to take, or at least figure out who I can take along with me on the ride, right? There's going to be some people who are always going to resist everything that you're trying to do, regardless of sort of your experience. And that happened here, right? There's people who aren't here anymore because they sort of opted out, or we decided that they weren't going to be the right fit culturally moving forward. But there's a lot of other people who had been here 20 years, who grew up in sort of founder-led mom and pop kind of business that we had now acquired, and now have seen, some pretty elite growth, and have started to learn some of the playbooks that, I think some of the best enterprise software companies run. And I think the best way to get people on that track is you also bring some people in, right? What I didn't do is I didn't fire everybody when I got here and build a new leadership team. My leadership team is a bit of a hybrid of old and then from my network, legacy and from my network. I shouldn't say old. And I think a lot of it was just like authenticity. Like how do you get people to believe that you have their best interests at heart, and that you're really doing things for the team and not just the individual. And when you can sort of get people to believe that that's true, and some of this is how you make decisions, I think you can get a lot of people on board quickly. Like I'm very proud of a very corny thing, but it's been 3 years and there's never been an account conflict that's gotten to my level in my time here. Europe doesn't fight with the US.
Wow.
Teams don't fight with each other. That's not what we do here, right? There's, I think, a lot of people who believe that this can be a $500 billion ARR company. And when we got here, the joke was it was the best kept secret in software. Nobody had heard of us, right? And that's been my opening slide at every GKO, like until this year. It won't be anymore because now we're a leader in the Magic Quadrant, multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and I think have done some pretty incredible things. But I think that none of that would have happened without that authenticity and getting people to really connect to the mission, and making sure you got rid of any cultural rot that might have been there or people that were working against you, and get everybody rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, that's quite natural that, when you walk into an organization as a CRO, you're going to find, like you said, some people that no matter what you do, they're not changing. You got another group that's just dying for your new leadership, and a big group in the middle that's saying, okay, what's going to happen here? And it sounds like you really moved.
We had, to that point, we do this engagement survey. And when you look from it, the ELT largely got hired at the same time. So none of the founders are in the business anymore. If you look when we got here, it was, 65, 70% favorable, and a big chunk in the middle to your little bit of negative, and a big chunk of undecided in the middle. In our most recent engagement survey, it's 91% favorable, right? So kind of best in class. We sort of won the hearts and minds of the middle, and gotten them on mission, which I think has been a huge key to the success of the company.
Yeah. I always say that the people that want your new leadership, they're too busy to sit around talking. But the naysayers, the people that don't want to change, they try to poison the people in the middle, right? They know who doesn't want to hear from them, the performers, but they know that there's another group that's just sitting there on the fence. And that's the group you have to move pretty fast. You have to get some wins early. But talk a little bit about, you talked about team versus me kind of culture, and you said you have to commit to it. Talk a little bit about what you mean by you have to commit to this team versus me mentality or culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book sitting here to my left that I had my whole leadership team read. By the way, your book's up there, John.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Background.
Hopefully you actually read it.
I did.
Just put it on the bookshelf.
Yeah, you're right below Mindset, so you're right next to each other. You're incredible. But I had my team read The Advantage by Lencioni for those who've read it.
Yeah,
It's a pretty interesting, I think, sort of exercise in organizational health. And we spent half a day together, sort of, everybody read the book, everybody took a chapter, had to talk about, what does that mean to this room, right? Who's your team? How does this change what your behavior is? So I think just going through exercises like that, where people are open and kind of drill in deep about like what's really their role in the organization, We have certain teams within the org because we're so multi-layered in terms of our go-to-market, where unfortunately some of our sales leaders are sort of constantly having people promoted off their team, right? So I had to get those people to realize that I'm judging you based on how many people we can promote off your team. If you miss the number by 5%, but I'm promoting half your team, I can take that hit because we're moving them into a larger role where their impact could be greater from a revenue standpoint, and we'll go make up for that little bit of a miss. But getting leaders to sort of understand that level of commitment to the organization is not natural for most of us, right? Because most of the people that end up in these roles are highly competitive, right? And they all want to be on top. So I think getting people to commit to that team is probably one of the hardest things that we do. And a lot of it goes to the hiring process, right? So the DNA of the people you hire will ultimately determine whether or not you're able to pull off that type of culture or not. And it's, I won't use the word that I use in some of the internal meetings, but you can't hire jerks, right? I mean, that is sort of a pretty hard and fast rule here for us. The job's hard, and doing it with people that they can't commit to a team-based culture just doesn't work in the way that we're structured as an organization here at Redwood.
You also talked about culture. I want to know a little bit more about what you meant by is what you tolerate. Culture is what you tolerate. Or when you describe that, give me an example too.
Yeah, so it can be simple things like performance, right? So there have been a couple leaders that, a couple QBRs into it, and you're talking about the same person for the third QBR.
Yeah.
You're sort of asking them like, kind of, what are we doing here? What are we tolerating as an organization? Right? You already know the answer, but you're not willing to do what needs to be done. And I think one of the lessons you learn the longer you do this is sometimes you let people go, and it's the best thing that can ever happen for them, right?
Yes. To go deeper on that, tell the audience what you mean by that.
I probably learned this from you way back in the day. So oftentimes, and I've been guilty of this myself, whatever it is, you're stuck in a bad emotional place you're in, whatever issue you're having, and ultimately sometimes moving on from an organization is the break that you need to either go find the role that's a better fit for your personality or your skill set. But also what you have to realize, like, some leaders get focused on the individual, and you've got to realize there's an SC, there's a technical account manager, there's a sales leader, there's all these people around them. And if that person is failing, they're bringing all those people down with them. Right. And you have to look out to the greater good of the organizational health. And look, that doesn't mean you get rid of everybody who's a bad quarter, right? You've got to get to the root of like what the problem is. But at some point, what you can't tolerate is quarter after quarter after quarter that there's an excuse around everything, right? An excuse-based culture isn't something that we tolerate here. We're very much a solution-based culture. Like, don't get lost in describing the problem to me. Get lost in describing the solution to me. Right.
If you tolerate it too long as a leader, then the people start to look at you and say, doesn't he see what we see? And
Correct.
What's wrong with our leader? So you have an obligation, like you said, to all the other people, to say, hey, this person is a problem, or that is a problem, and we need to fix it and fix it now.
There's nothing worse than when you get a text from a rep or a couple ICs on a team, and it's about something that has been tolerated by their leader, and you're like, man, everybody can see this.
They all see it. I always say that they're always talking about you. Like you said earlier on, that they listen to every word you say. They're also talking about you all the time, whether you believe it or not. They are.
Yeah, that part freaks me out a little bit.
Isn't this topic really the same symptom or the same underlying problem? It's recruitment pipeline. I find that family tree conversation that you talked about earlier, Matt, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Like, how do you really instill a culture of your best people are going to get promoted, and they should be getting promoted because that's what our culture is going to be. And really the only reason why that they hesitate, it's pipeline. It's like recruiting pipeline. And the only reason why people hang on to bad people or questionable people is pipeline. That's the only reason. So how do you get a culture to really understand that and not go to HR and say, hey, we have problems. We don't have enough, resumes, blah, 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 blah. The best CROs ever seen really understand this point. Could you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it happened very early on in my tenure here. I had a leader who's still with us. He's sort of grown through this, but he had an underperforming team. We ended up getting rid of the whole team, rebuilding the entire theater in EMEA. And he was complaining to me about the quality of the pipeline from the talent acquisition team in HR. And I was like, man, you don't get the job. Like, that's your job. Like, recruiting pipeline is like your number one job, right? And that's kind of when I realized very early on, like, the 3 R's, recruit, retain, revenue, like that recruiting piece, like I was going to have to hammer home that point, to the point where I started showing people like, no, let's have daily stand-ups on people pipeline, right? Especially in the early days when we were having to build out and scale the org. But even now, like it's a relentless constant, right? Like our ICs need to be doing PG all the time, and our leaders need to be doing PG around people, right? So they constantly need to be doing recruiting. I had somebody the other day kind of slip up, and they're like, "Oh, this is my last headcount to fill." And I go, "Well, wait a minute. We also have talked about somebody on your team who we're not convinced about. Like, you need to go 3, 4, 5 more people that you're constantly keeping warm." I mean, we hired a guy just last week, just started at GKO. Third time he's worked with me. W2 nearly $3 million last year. So yes, those W2s do still exist. And decided to join Redwood. I've been recruiting him for a year and a half, right? So for a year and a half, I've been trying to get him out of that org. So at my level, I think what's interesting, and I've tried to teach this to the leaders, like my favorite thing to do now is recruit. Like there's nothing better. Like I would rather, hire that rep that I just talked about and get him into our org than win a new logo. Because to me, like the multiplicative effect of having like great people is like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Having great leaders, having great ICs, getting like elite at recruiting, it just makes everything so much easier. And when you don't do it, you end up in that, that's how you get fired in 18 months when you're in my job.
I was going to say, do you think you can be a CRO without having that mentality?
No, I mean, you can,
I
not
don't.
for very long.
I don't. Yeah.
When I look at people who have 18-month stints, I generally go, they probably didn't focus on recruiting. They probably focused on revenue first and kind of got lost and then got too deep and they didn't build the structure.
And it's probably the number one, when I think about it, like owning the number, that's just kind of table stakes, right? It's the number one thing that I find that great CROs do is they teach their frontline managers how to recruit, because I think that's the biggest area of opportunity for frontline managers. They just do not have an experience of recruiting if they grew up inside the company or they have like first time leaders or what have you. And screaming at the scoreboard is just, I see it happening all the time. And then all of a sudden is, everybody's talking about internal talent acquisition or what have you. And you just know that company's going to fail.
Yeah, I mean, we that's not an excuse that anybody gets to use it at Redwood. I think everybody's now very, very clear that like we own the people pipeline. I mean, it's sort of that simple. And you can see it across teams. The teams that are great at recruiting are the teams that within a quarter or two have, outlandish results. Our strategic accounts team last year, I think 8 of the 9 people in that team are from our network, and I think the worst performer was 180% of his number last year. I mean, and that was because we were relentless about, and it's multi-year too. I mean, like I said, like that guy that we just hired, that was an 18-month recruitment process for me.
Yeah, it's a sourcing thing. Normally, when I find the what people need help with, I mean, there's a lot of stages of recruiting, but let's talk a little bit about sourcing. What advice do you give?
Just before you do that, Johnny, so because we were talking about tough people decisions earlier, but just going to your point, when you do recruit a superstar and you see them and you thought, it's a really tough decision whether or not I'm going to let this person go. And because you've been constantly recruiting and then the superstar shows up, the decision is so clear.
Yeah.
You and to everybody else. So just wanted to comment on that before we do.
Well, that's kind of Johnny, that's kind of that rule of 3, right? Somebody's going to get demoted or moved out of the business, not because they're bad people, just because it's not whatever's going on.
Yep.
Somebody should be getting promoted, and somebody's going to surprise you. And I think when you have that mindset, you know that no matter what, you have three openings on your team at all times. And I think, like you say, Johnny, when you see it just show up, and you just say, like, who does this person remind me of on my team? And if the answer is nobody, or if the answer is a superstar, it's really, really easy. But I find, Matt, the what I find the struggle is most of the people have the heart, the mind, the desire, and to do this, to participate in their own rescue. They don't know how to source. They do not know how to source.
Yeah.
So what talk to us about some of the things that you've come up with from a sourcing perspective over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've unlocked any magic there other than we made some pretty good hires early. And as soon as we make a good hire, the first question like, let's say it's a quarter in and they're not from our network. This happened in EMEA. We sort of rebuilt EMEA around a younger seller who wasn't from our network, but like we just loved him in the interview process. 3 months in, I watch a gong call, and this guy is running the best negotiation call I've ever seen. He's like a 30-year-old rep. And I immediately, we share it with the whole company. And I immediately ask him, who's the hardest guy you've ever sold against? Who's your,
Love that.
your biggest competitor and then we brought that guy in. And both of those guys were over 200% of their number last year. I was trying to think if they were over 300%. They've been that successful.
They run in packs, right?
You do, yeah. And then that gives you, I mean, it's as simple as like those two hires, you can rebuild an entire region around it.
Yeah.
Because now we use them in the recruiting process, and we just keep chipping away at top talent from other companies. You've got to be, look, part of my job is to be like, I have a pretty big network, so I've got to be relentless about understanding what's happening at other companies that may have hired well but are now running into trouble. You then immediately sick, your leaders onto those organizations to go try and recruit their top talent out of there. And look, we've been fortunate that one of the good things about PE, candidly, is we don't overhire. So because we don't overhire, because we run a pretty profitable business here, what it means for the ICs is that they've got good territories and they can make money.
Great point.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting adjustment to me. It's not like the hyperscale sort of thing that we saw when interest rates were nothing and money was free. We run a really I won't say the exact number on the podcast, but it's well over 40% EBITDA with over 30% growth. Like for an IC, that is opportunity, man. That's dollar signs. So that's allowed us to continue to recruit at like the highest end of the market. And then look, part of it, John, goes all the way back to, for 20 years, I've been recruiting for being in this seat, right? So I was whether I was a first line or a second line, every year I would run through my Rolodex and call people, right? Just to touch base. And some of those leaders are working for me now here, right? And a lot of these guys were guys that were actually at higher levels than me at the time when I first met them. But I knew that I was going to get to this chair one day. And if I was going to do it, I was going to have to build long-lasting relationships.
Great point.
And if I did, they were going to pay off. So, I mean, it's literally for me been almost a 20-year process of building out a network of people that I could call when I needed them. And it's, think about beyond sales. I hired our general counsel. I brought in our chief product officer, right? That's not in my area of responsibility, but when we thought we needed to make a change there, I brought our CPO in, our head of RevOps, somebody from my network from 15 years ago. So I've been pretty relentless about like keeping in touch with people and how I treat people, so that when the opportunity arose and there was a high performer out there, like we had a network of people we could go after. And I've sort of cascaded that. My leadership team has now seen that work and at play. So the next second line, third line leader that works for me that wants to be a CRO sees what the impact of recruiting that way can be on an organization.
And that moves to CEO.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've seen people do that. I watched John do it, being a 5-time CRO. I'm not saying he just took a band of characters and moved them, because some people do that. They try to take cookie cutter, my old team and place them there. That's not what I'm talking about. But one of the things I watched Johnny do in his 5 times as an unbelievably successful CRO is that fact right there. It was always thinking about, this is a long-term run with a pack of wolves. And those pack of wolves just just went and did incredible things. So I love that concept you're bringing. Act like you have the next job is really the feedback you're giving to people. Even if you don't have it today, act like you're going to have it in the future. I love that.
The other thing too is because it seems pretty evident, but a lot of people don't do it, like Matt was talking about, where you have to constantly recruit. So I remember that this guy that I recruited, he's now a CEO of a company. But when I recruit, because I was constantly recruiting, and I recruited him, I had no place for him. It had no place for him. But I realized, oh my gosh, this guy's like a superstar. I got to take him and I got to get him on my team somehow, right? Go to the CEO and I say, hey, you got to interview this person. He says, well, John, I already told you, like, you have no more headcount left and we have no open positions. I said, okay, well, why don't you interview him and then you let me know. Okay, so the CEO interviews him and says, oh my gosh, we got to hire this person. I was like, yeah, no shit. So I made an opportunity and put him in an opportunity and said, all I want you to do is go on sales calls. I gave him a nice title, go to the training classes, and something's going to open up. And sure enough, like 4 months later, something opened up. I popped him in the job and the guy took off from there. So sometimes when you run into a superstar, don't let him go. Find an opportunity to put them on the team somehow, because to our point before, or yours, Johnny, where you basically have 3 openings on that team. That's the same thing for leadership too. There's a lot of leaders that are going to move around and surprise you also.
Nobody should miss out on an A player from head count.
No.
Never.
Even when you can't, I'll tell you something I'm in the middle of doing right now. I don't have an obvious senior leader spot right now, but all my 1Bs for a lot of the spots that I filled, if they're on the market, my goal is to go get them another job in another company, right?
Great point.
Is every single lead that comes into my inbox, look, it's easy to just ignore every recruiter, right? You get 3, 4, 5 of these calls a week in a role like mine, especially after going through a recap like we just did. But there's people out there looking for stuff. If you can build loyalty, that's a guy you might need 3 years.
Great point.
He remembers that you got him the last job. So I think it's just being relentless about that is it's sort of like, medic, which, I learned from you working back at, or medpic, whatever you want to call it, working back at Blade Logic. Once it gets in your DNA, you can't unlearn it. And I think if you're a really great recruiter, once it gets in your DNA and you see the impact of it, you can't unlearn it. It becomes sort of what you index on.
You see people that are great networkers. I love that point that you just said, is that they're connecting people with other people their entire life. Sometimes they come along with them and other times but life has a way of coming back. The universe kind of goes full circle. I love that. I haven't heard that in a while. That's a great one.
And look, I'm an introvert. I don't like doing it, right? I'm like a lot of people. I'm the extroverted introvert or whatever you want to call it. But if you do a bunch of good things, you figured that's if I had to place my bets, I'd rather do it that way than not helping people, right?
And I always used to think that for me, no matter what wasn't going well for me, when I was out recruiting, I always felt fantastic. Like, because it tested my mettle on whether I really believed in the opportunity, because I could hear it in my own voice. If I didn't believe what I did mattered, or I knew I wasn't good in front of recruits, but I knew that I could always change my world. One new person could change my world in a company. And it's like one new deal. Can that change your world? Sometimes, but I always felt like the people part could change my destiny more than the accounts could, if that makes sense.
So we just came off GKO, really good example of this. You can still hear my voice. I lost my voice 10 days ago, the first day of GKO, right? Terrible time to lose your voice as a CRO. 3 GKOs ago, 70% of the content I built and delivered myself. Like, this was the Matt Nolan show, which is not a good long-term strategy. This GKO, I lose my voice, and it's the best GKO we ever had, because we've built a leadership team where I'm candidly not as important as I used to be, which is the right. So how do you build up sort of that talent pool around you where hopefully I'm not completely unimportant, but in things like that, you've got people that you can rely on, and like there's just no way to do it but like we're like very anti-hero ball here. Like it's systems and it's good people and it's process, and like that's how we're gonna that's how we're going to scale and achieve, not by having, somebody like myself or one of my leaders be incredible. It's a team of people who are all really talented. So.
Yeah, it has to be a top priority for leaders. They have to do all the stuff that you normally do during the day and during the week, but they have to commit that the top priority is recruiting, especially if you have some sort of opening. So I can even remember when I had an opening in China for a leader, and I thought, okay, this week I'm doing nothing but recruiting a leader in China. And man, it was hard, but when you then focus all your attention and network as much as you can, like you pointed out, Matt, all of a sudden, bang, here comes the person, they turn up.
And that person had an impact for decades. You're talking about
Yeah,
Steve Sue,
okay,
I'm
you know who
assuming.
it is.
Steve Sue is one of my favorite people on the planet.
Right.
Holy, and this is a point I want to make too, is that like what I also hear you guys saying is, for me, the best people I've ever recruited were the not in play players. And people say, well, what does that mean? It's the people that were in jobs and successful. And it took you a while to recruit them. The value proposition developed, the intimacy developed, that's the importance of the recruiting pipeline. Most people, when I look at, okay, show me your pipeline, it's all these resumes of people that are in transition. Nothing against people in transition. I've been in transition before. But I have found that the best examples of the most impact players over time are the ones that took a while to recruit. I've got examples of a person that I recruited actually for 10 years at Force Management, and he went on to replace me at Force Management, Brian Walsh, and just did incredible things. Some of my favorite ones are people that took me a year, 2 years, 3 years. And those are some of the best performing and relationships I've ever had. It's hard for people to understand that because it's like it's not instant gratification. John, I have an opening now. We got an opening now because we don't have a pipeline, and it's a hard, it's a hard thing to do.
We did it coming into this year, which is like hire ahead of even the board approved plan. Like, let's go start like no open headcount to start the year. Like we doubled parts of the sales force. We had almost all those people at GKO. I mean, there was very little open headcount. I've got plenty of text messages, to your point, John, of people that I'm relentlessly after that don't yet work here that better within the next 12 to 18 months. Like, they're super high performers. They're in good places right now. But the second that there's a little bit of weakness in the spot that they're in, like, I don't want them going into market. I want to be the first person that even has the conversation.
And they know too, like, I love those relationships, Matt. They trust you and they're like, I got my head down here. When it's right, Matt and I are going to talk, and I'll make a move when it's right. And those are the best transitions. The expectations, everybody understands them.
But I think it takes work, right? I think the one thing
a lot of work
leaders need to realize, and most of my leadership team, candidly, didn't have this in their DNA. They actually did not come from places where this was like driven into them. But the discipline that we teach the ICs around PG, like, the leaders have to understand, it is the same level of discipline as the leader around recruiting. It's not just a number, because it's going to show up at some point because you haven't recruited. You're going to have some weakness, and now all of a sudden it's going to take you 9 months to recover.
Johnny, you did such a great job of this. Yeah. Back in the day, I'd be in a forecast call and I'd hear McMahon say, recruit. I would be in a product management call or whatever, a problem in the company, a problem and I would hear McMahon's voice, recruit. And it was a cultural thing that recruiting, it's like pipeline solves all ills. It's the exact same thing in recruiting. You just get new blood, new ideas, new momentum. I'm not saying to change over your entire sales force, but I'm saying if you have a mentality that really everything is about recruiting top talented people to your organization, I've never seen that formula equal failure.
It's a mindset. No matter where you go to a party, you go to a barbecue, you go invited over somebody's house. Hey, what do you do? I'm a salesperson. Really? What do you sell? All that stuff. And next thing you know, you're turning up somebody, or to Matt's point, you're building a relationship with them over the course of 3 or 4 months until you have an opening, and bang, you can put that person in the job. But it's not a faucet. It's not something you turn on and off.
Right.
It's something that has to be on all the time. It's that total mindset as a leader, like I'm recruiting and constantly looking to upgrade my team. And if you don't have that mindset, yeah, you're gonna miss out on some superstars that were right in front of you.
Going back to sort of the first time CRO stuff, I think one of the things you start to realize is the math of the larger problem becomes very obvious to you, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the levers I have to pull across the entire organization? And two really easy ones are I can't have open headcount and I've got to shorten the time to ramp, right? I've got to be graded enablement so that I can beat the math of like what my expected ramp is for people so that I can beat the plan. That's hiring not late, not on time, but hiring early,
Yes.
doing graded enablement so that I can shorten the ramp. And I think that's one of the things that maybe you don't see it as much as the first line, maybe you start to see it as the second line. But man, when you get to the highest level of the org and you see them, little open headcount spots all over the place and you add that all together, you really understand the math of like why recruiting becomes critical and then ultimately why enablement becomes sort of the next step in that
Yeah, let's go through that. So what Matt's alluding to is, and I've actually seen this in some companies that I went and consulted with, where they didn't do well in the quarter, and the sales force was sizable. So then let's say the productivity per sales rep is 1.2 million per year. It's 100,000 a month. So you go around the room and you stand up and ask the first line leaders, even the second line leaders, how late were you in recruiting? Well, I wasn't late. I was only a month late. You go to the next person. I was only a month and a half late. It's not a problem.
Oh.
I hired the person 2 months late, but that's not that big of a deal. It's not going to affect me. And actually, at the first line level, they have a chance to make that up with a bigger deal or ramping the rep a little bit quicker. At your level as a CRO, it's the aggregation of all of that. So let's say you have 50 first line managers and they all miss by only 1 month.
Yeah.
It's $5 million. How the hell are you going to make up $5 million? Where are you going to find it? You can't find it. Given that productivity stays at 1.2 million and even 30 of them missed by 1 month, $3 million. Good luck as a CRO. You just lost your job.
Yeah. I mean,
that's why it has to be so paramount at your level, because you are the aggregation of all of their mistakes, which they don't really pay a high penalty for.
Yeah, I mean, I make sure I'm very transparent about what that math looks like all the way up and down.
Yeah, good.
And I think part of that is, look, I've got some people who want to be CROs, so part of it is kind of paying it forward. Like, hey, here's some of the stuff nobody really told me. Here's what it looks like, and here's why it's important, and here's your kind of role in the operation. Because I can tell you, when I was a first line leader, I didn't see that at all. I was absolutely, I'm going to make up for that with this deal over here. Don't worry about it.
Right.
And sometimes you can. Look, there's quarters where you can do more with less, and that can happen, but it's not a long-term sustainable strategy for anything other than to be replaced by somebody else.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to make it fully, and sounds like you're doing it, fully understandable by the first, second, third line leaders of why you have to recruit ahead of time.
I'll go so far as to say this is now getting pushed beyond the org that I handle, right? So into the engineering orgs, the product orgs, some of these parts of the orgs that maybe don't traditionally have this type of DNA, we're starting to sort of try and teach those parts of the organization like how this is critical really everywhere. It's not just sales and quota carriers and our services people and our TAMs and our SCs. It's our SaaS team. If we're 6 months late hiring the right leader for the SaaS team, well then we're not going to deliver on product. And if we don't deliver on product the right way, that is these things all have revenue impacts, right? All the roles are revenue impacting. Some are more obvious than others, but they all have an impact. And I think it's important for the CEO, the CRO, the COO, whatever the power structure is in the company, to start to get some of that philosophy outside of sales as well, and to start to drive it into the DNA of the entire organization. And if you can, like, that's a company I don't want to compete against, right? Because that's a company that's like really firing on all cylinders. And
that's why you're killing it in private equity, bro.
Yeah, I mean,
you get that. You don't get that kind of growth without that kind of mindset. No chance.
No, I mean, we accelerated this thing pretty rapidly over the past couple of years with really no major product developments, right? It was mostly coverage, messaging, recruiting, and it's been awesome. And now our product teams are catching up, and we're about to, I think, deliver a bunch of really interesting sort of product to market over the next 12 to 18 months. But it's been a fun ride so far.
Talk a little bit about, we keep touching on sourcing, but we never really, it sounds like right now, if I'm a listener, the way you source, or the way all three of us source, is just by constantly talking to different people. But is there a method or certain, sources that you can reliably source from?
So I'm probably pretty relentless on LinkedIn. I'm a 3 times a day on LinkedIn myself, looking to source people in different organizations that I learn. Anything I learn about an organization, if I think there's some organizational weakness, I go after it. But
it could be an organizational strength, right? Because it could be a company that recruits really well, trains really well, develops really well, and maybe they're not growing that fast all of a sudden. So it doesn't have to be an acquisition. It doesn't have to be the other thing. It could be that they execute pretty well with their people, right?
If a leader I respect leaves, I immediately, and I know they've got sort of the same DNA, I'm immediately all over that Salesforce, right? Figuring out who the best people, and oftentimes texting that CRO, like, hey, who are the people I should be going after? I saw you just left. I think the other thing we do is sometimes we'll have, almost like we do with PG, where you may have like a full day block of PG, but a lot of times we do small groups of PG where everybody's working on the same, everybody bring 5 accounts and everyone work on it collectively to try and break in. Oftentimes we'll do the same thing for a role with leaders, right? So huddle up a bunch of leaders together for an hour and let's like kind of relentlessly, because part of recruiting is if it's not in people's DNA and they don't slow down to do it, oftentimes you find out by just slowing people down and putting a meeting on the calendar to go through their network, it's like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about so-and-so or so-and-so. So just having the discipline to make it structured, I think a lot of times allows you to uncover some hidden gems in people's networks that maybe they hadn't thought about, right?
I like that. I like it a lot. And Johnny, to your point, and Matt, your earlier point of making it part of your DNA, like 3 great ones for me for sourcing were the interview itself. If I loved the person, I knew they ran in a pack of dogs, and I told them, look, I want to hire you, but in order to hire you, you got to bring me 2 people. You got to bring me 2 additional people because we want to grow this thing and we want the other dogs with us. That's one. If it was not a great interview, I would find out who the number 1 person was in that company. Though, so it's a mindset in interviews. Reference checks. I have people look at me and say, you're crazy. They're just going to give you a good reference. That bullcrap. I wanted to do the reference checks. Why? Because I wanted, if it was a great person, I wanted to find out who else that person knew that was like that person, because they're going to naturally want to help those people do well in the next roles. And customers was a great one, where customers, I would go to customers and I wouldn't say, hey, who's our biggest competitor? I wouldn't say, who do you like buying from the most? Like if we weren't winning, because they're not going to give you their A player because they have a relationship. They need that product to work, blah, blah, blah. But like when we win, I'd love to go to them and say, who would you have bought from if they had our product? What seller would you have bought from if they had our product? And it's amazing how loyal people are to people that do great jobs in like a sales campaign, and they wanted to give them the business. They just didn't have the right product. Those are 3 great areas that if you make it part of your mindset, you're doing that every day.
I'll give you a slight twist on that we did here. So always do we do back channel. We don't make references, but we do back channel. One of my leaders was going to hire somebody he's like, oh, you wouldn't know anybody from that company. I looked the guy up. I know the head of RevOps. So I call the head of RevOps, longtime connection of mine, back channel the guy. She's like, you should definitely hire him. The UK's a mess. He performed, blah, blah, blah. So great. We get a good back channel. What's the next thing I do? Are you happy there? You just told me the UK's a mess, right? Let's talk about your career. Where are you at?
That.
She's now running RevOps for us here, right? So
love that.
Recruit the people that you're doing the back channel with as well, right?
Love that.
So I think that's
a mindset. That's a mindset.
Yeah.
Those aren't tactics. Those
the
are
other
mindsets.
thing that I found in sourcing, especially when, Matt, you probably ran into this when your people, you now ask them to build pipeline. There's two things that occur. One, they have to know what good looks like. And number two, which is always surprising to me, they can't sell the opportunity.
Yeah.
You have to actually learn how to sell the opportunity for that specific person. So you have to, really uncover what that person does well and what they're looking for and what motivates them, what demotivates them, and actually then turn that into, how do I sell my opportunity? But if they don't know what good looks like and they can't sell the opportunity, which happens a lot, it's really difficult to recruit.
Yeah, I mean, we just spent, to that point, John, 4 hours with my leaders at the end of GKO. So the last day I kept them for half a day, and almost the entire session was teaching. Actually, candidly, a lot of your playbook, but a lot of it was around how to recruit, how to sell, how to hook people, how to connect, specific questions to ask, why you ask them. Like there is a whole playbook that needs to be taught around how to do that. It's not and no offense to my colleague, we have a great HR team here, but it's not like the list of interview questions that you get about, hey, make sure we tie off on these things. There are tactics and strategies to interviewing and recruiting that are absolutely critical to learn to land high profile talent. And if you're just sort of winging it, and if you're not prepping for your interviews, if you don't have a strategy, if you don't know like what you're trying to accomplish, you generally don't end up with top talent. You absolutely, as John, as Cap said earlier, like you've got to sell the opportunity to top talent, right? To those, and a lot of times in an interview, like, all right, the first 15 minutes, I got to hook this person, right? I need to teach my job is to teach my leadership team how to do that, right? So that we're not just, relentlessly berating people with stupid interview questions, that we have a purpose and we've got a strategy for what we're doing to uncover top talent.
I love that. I saw us, one of the best exercises I've ever seen at like a GKO or an SKO or what have you, is the leader go through the room and ask somebody to stand up with no preparation, to be audible ready, and said, in your case, Matt, let's just use Redwood. Why Redwood? Go. Like in the recruiting process, like I want you to recruit me. So explain to me why Redwood. And one person stood up, totally fumbled their way around. Okay, the next person stood up. They did a little bit better, and what the person said was, if you're not excited about this opportunity, why should I be? And it really set a tone in the entire room that said, we are responsible, like we're a walking audition for what it's going to be like to be in this company. And, if you can't explain, and what this person did was great. Like, hey, let's get out of the role play for a second, but like, why do you love it here? And they just started talking about why Redwood and what was great about Redwood and what it was able to do for themselves, their families, for the people around them. And then slowly they built this value proposition. It's one of the greatest exercises I've ever seen. And their recruitment totally changed because the people going out, you're getting judged. Like when you're trying to get an A player, they're looking in your eyes. And if you're not excited about what you do, why should I be?
There's nothing better than at the end of an interview when the candidate tells you like how excited they are because of how you've pitched especially in my role, like I'm the last interview, and I still interview all the ICs we hire and will continue to as long as I can scale that. Yeah, it's the best feeling in the world. It's when it's our choice, not theirs, and they're leaned in and they're excited.
Totally.
But that's a skill. You got to teach it. You can't just, you got to prepare for it. Like it's a skill.
And the other part of the sourcing, which we talked about, is, what does good look like? So what does a good resume look like, or a good LinkedIn profile look like? So we used to take, let's say, 10 different resumes, cross out the names of people that were either in the company, got promoted in the company, came and left the company. And then what we would do is break the leaders into groups and say, okay, take these 10 resumes, rank them in order of who you would hire or even source for this case, and come back to us and stand up there and explain the whys. Like, why? What do you see in these resumes? And what do you see as lacking? I found that that's an amazing exercise. Amazing.
One of my favorite exercises to do. We haven't done it probably about 6 months, but it's good reminder.
It's a great reminder. And then the punchline is, would you hire this person? And in some cases, the group says no. And then we just, you got to make sure you protect. You don't want to be
Yeah.
bringing a bad situation from an HR perspective, whatever. But my favorite thing is then why did we? Like, we actually hired that person, or what would they find, like Johnny and Adam Aarons, like a resume from Adam Aarons would have been like Cutco knives or whatever the hell he was
Yes,
doing. Would
exactly.
you hire this person? Or say, hell no, he's selling Cutco knives. Well, he's a CEO of a company today. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
that's a great exercise. Thank you for reminding me on that. That's a
Yeah.
really good one.
Yep.
Well, there's a lot of things and it's brilliant because you have, your first and second and even sometimes third line leaders in that discussion. And sometimes they see things that you might not see. And it teaches the whole group, like, wow, that's pretty good insight, just of what you picked up just from that resume or that LinkedIn profile, right?
I like this, Johnny, because from a CRO, Matt, I think one of the great things that you can do is, I call it getting in the pit. Like, we can tell people you got to recruit, and I think recruiting alongside of a new leader or a leader that's struggling recruiting is some of the best experiences I've ever had. It's been the funnest of my career, where somebody tells me we can't get anybody in Germany because all of our customers believe that Germany, PTC in Germany is Scientology. That's a whole nother podcast. I'll go into it later, but I'm telling you, and I'm like, okay, so you're telling me we can't recruit anybody in Germany. And it was so good for me because, first of all, it was real. There was cultural issues. And I was finding that out. I'm in the pit. But some of the best people we brought to the company were people that I had to go stumble through with the leader right alongside of me. And then what I used to love to do is get a couple of pairs of eyes, have two people. So if I was teaching somebody, great. I was also learning too. When I went into a new part of the world or what have you, I was learning about what was going on. And you have one person in there that you say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to look for areas of opportunity for like additional people, like 3 more names or something. And so they had a role and responsibility. It wasn't just, 2 people sitting in a room and one person saying nothing. So I found that there's some ways to really mix this up so everybody learns. Everybody learns.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun, to your point, when we kind of went through this here in EMEA when we rebuilt that team. My leader had never seen great. He had been here a decade. It was a different kind of company. And when he started to see the impact of, like, he made one great hire, and then, the second guy came along with him and his world changed, right? Actually, he got sales leader of the year last year. I forget, the 240% of his quota, something like that. Like, it's just an incredible year as a leader, right? You don't see a lot of 200% plus as a leader very often. And you look at that team today and what it was 3 years ago, and it's like, if you don't understand recruiting now, like, I can't ever teach you, because it's so obvious what having that talented team and doing that with him, I think, was a super fun exercise, to your point, like doing it next to each other. And like, we got to the point of his daily stand-ups on recruiting. Like, all right, we're going to have a daily stand-up on recruiting, and let's figure out where we are. What's the people pipeline? Who are we moving? How fast are we moving them? And understanding that from a leader standpoint, like, no, this is the job right now. And then this needs to become a part of your DNA and your cadence forever. Like, I think it's fun to watch people transform from never having seen great to now seeing great, and then getting the benefits of it, right? With, getting on stage and getting a trophy a couple of years later.
Holy
When they see
smokes.
great, when they see great, and it's great is throughout the whole organization, then everybody actually sees it. Even the secretaries
Yeah.
see it. So you bring somebody up that's going to interview with you, and as the person walks in the door, you can say, I had a secretary that would go like,
No chance.
no, just wave her head back and forth like, there's no way this person's going to make it, or like, this person's going to make it. Because they go down and they interface with that person right away, and they start asking them questions, and it might be a 3-minute walk up to your office, and they extract a lot of information. They know what good looks like because they're in that environment, And I wouldn't say that 100% of the time they were right, but they were pretty close most of the time.
It's a data point, if nothing else, that can be
Right.
very.
Yeah.
Hubert's got my juices going, man. It's like, no matter what state you're in, whether you're great situation and you want to continue to be great and win multiple championships, whether you have a horrible situation, you can change it around. Like, look at your Eagles, Matt, that are playing, for the Super Bowl this weekend. They go from from winning a championship to going down to like bringing in top talent, how quickly that turns around. Like, you can change your world immediately today by bringing in top talent to your company, no matter what you do.
Yeah, I'll sort of leave you with this on the topic. We had Coach Todd DeSorbo, who's the head coach of the University of Virginia women's swimming and diving team, 4-time national champions, right? And we brought Coach in. I got to spend a bunch of time with him, kind of one-off, to speak at our GKO that we just had. And what do you think the big secret to building a dynasty was, right? We look at our organization, Redwood, we've won a championship. We're now trying to build a dynasty. It's recruiting, right? Like, go get, like, it's culture, right? Go recruit and then build culture around those people. And then you get a couple of those top recruits and that flywheel just starts to take effect. And the thing around culture that I think what Coach and I agreed on is, like, you don't have to morph your culture to everybody. It can't be homogenized. You have to build a culture that's what you are, and people are going to opt out or opt in from that culture. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be the right culture for everyone.
Great point.
My culture is very different than what it was when I got acquired into IBM. That culture wasn't for me. Probably very different than Microsoft and very different than a lot of other companies, right? We have a very specific way that we want to carry ourselves and how we're going to go win our version of a national championship here at Redwood. And that's, I think, a critical component of kind of all this, right? Like, recruiting is sort of the foundation, and then the culture is the thing that sustains you and allows you to win multiple natties.
Ripped our face.
Johnny, I think you remember, like, I won't say who it was, but I went in with a D1 football coach, and he asked me to help the team and the leaders recruit. And I basically took a modified version of MedPick and taught them that, where basically, you're trying to understand what's the decision criteria. Identify the pains that this person has, or their initiatives for going to a school or going to some other school. Who's the coach, and who's the champion? Like, who really has influence over this person? Maybe it's somebody that's down the street that used to play in the NFL. Maybe it's their mom. Maybe it's their dad. Maybe it's their brother or sister. But these guys they were going in and recruiting and only seeing how great the program was, blah, 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 blah. But they were never really looking for different motivations and criteria to recruit. And that next year they had been, according to, like, I can't remember the name of the company that looks at it. I think it's called scout.com. They got the #1 recruiting class.
It is.
Only by changing a little bit of things and giving them some insight into what's going on in this family. What's going on with this kid? How should I recruit them?
It's funny. When you think about everything in life to be successful at, you have to have command of the plan or the number. You have to have, like, command of that. And you have to have command of the talent. You have to have the ability to attract and retain. We haven't talked a lot about that. That's another podcast. But, like, no matter what you're doing, a new administration comes in, a new whatever, those two things, to simplify this podcast, if you have command of your number and you got command of your people, you're going to go a long, long way. And Matt, sounds like over the last 3 years, you've been doing that really, really well, my friend.
Made a lot of mistakes before I got to this place. So it's...
That's learning from your mistakes is what makes you good, Matt. We all have them. I call them the scars of experience. So thanks a lot for doing this, Matt. This was awesome. I think it's really valuable to the audience.
Great. Well, appreciate being here. Good to see you guys again. And, if anybody learned anything from this podcast, you can be bad at everything. If you're great at recruiting, you can cover for a lot of sins and fill those in other ways. But it's hard to do the inverse, right?
Thanks, John Kaplan. Thanks, Matt Nolan. Thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.